Hello sweet friends, and welcome to the Rebookery channel. In this video I'm going to be working in my little swatch book. So this is a book that I put together very simply. Just took some old quilt, and that was my cover, and then I originally started it with some watercolor paper. I've been using it to do some watercolor swatches, but then I realized that I really like acrylic paint also, and I'd like to do some of this swatching with my acrylic paints. And so my goal for this was, because I want to get familiar with paint and I want it to be something that's not overwhelming. I'm not ready to go out and paint like a landscape or anything. I just want to kind of get familiar with how to use the paints. This would be a great little journal for me to be mindful on a daily, semi-daily basis about different color combinations that I come across throughout my day. So I originally did a video showing you guys how I set this up with my watercolor, and I'll link that below. But I'm going to add another section to it. I'm going to actually add 2 more sections to it. So I'm going to use just some book paper for this middle section, because with acrylic paint I don't really need the watercolor, and I don't want to the watercolor paper, and I don't want to spend the money on watercolor paper if I don't have to use it. So I'm just going to use some book pages because I love the effect of using, acrylic paints and different types of collage on book paper. So I'm going to use book paper, and then the other section, the third section, I'm going to go back to using watercolor paper because I had already trimmed down the papers and had them ready to go. So I am just going to bind this journal very, very simply. Now, if I was going to put this in my shop and I was going to sell this, I would absolutely take my time and do a better job. But because this is just for me and I don't care how it looks, as long as it functions, I'm totally okay. So what you just saw me do was, now since I'm adding 2 more signatures to this journal, I need to extend the length of the journal. And so I just grabbed some fabric that I had that was kind of the same thickness as that quilt. Oh, by the way, there's that's where I store all my needles and stuff whenever I bind my books. And I came up with some magnetic tape that I had in my classroom forever, and it was just sitting there, and I was like, oh my gosh, I could use this at home. So I brought it home, and now everything has magnetic tape on it, and it's a great way to store my pins and my needles. Okay, back to this. So I just took some fabric and I added a little extra on the edge there. And then I'm going to just do a 3-hole pamphlet stitch, a very simple one. But because I'm adding 2 more signatures, I want to enforce this quilt a little bit. So the tape you see me using there is book tape or book cloth tape. It is super, super sticky. Do not ever put it through your sewing machine. It will gum up your sewing machine, and yeah, it'll do bad things. So if you poke a hole in it though, which I did, you should be able to hand sew through it. But it is super, super sticky, and what it'll do is it'll just give a little more reinforcement to my spine. And the first signature didn't have it behind the spine. But again, this journal is just for me, so the junkier, the better. I'm totally okay with that. If this was something that I was giving to someone, I would definitely go back and make sure I had reinforced all of the spine. So on the front of the journal there, you can see where I've got some pieces. This journal is serving multi-purposes. One, I want it to be something where I can do some mindfulness, like paying attention to color combinations and just things I see on a daily basis. 2, it's going to help me get familiar with my paints, in particular my watercolors and my gouache paint. 3, it kind of gives me a little bit of experience with just painting itself. So not only being familiar with the colors, but just how paint works and kind of working on my skills a little bit. I've only done a few pages in this journal. I've already gotten brave, and I actually just did a spread here a few minutes ago, and I actually drew in it, and I was proud of my drawing. And then the last thing is I'm gonna tackle some hand stitching. Hand stitching is probably the least favorite of all of my crafting. I cannot, for whatever reason, my eyes don't work like they should and my fingers don't work like they should. And I like sewing a button. My husband sews his own buttons on his shirts because I just cannot do it. Like I just cannot, it is physically impossible for me to do. But I'm going to do it anyway. So what I've been doing is just taking little scraps, beads, things like that, and sewing it on this cover. And I love it. I'm getting better at it. I put together a little slow stitching kit that I can just kind of pick up and take with me if I want to go sit outside. That's one thing I've noticed, is that I really need good light whenever I'm doing it. But I would love to share that with you guys in another video, because it's kind of cool, all the stuff I found that was around my room that I finally put together, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to use this stuff. So I'm going to use this journal for some stitching, but I'm going to also use it for some color swatching and mindfulness and just experimentation and play. So here's what I'm doing with these book pages. Because I'm going to use acrylic paint and who knows whatever else, I'm going to put some gesso on these pages, and I'm just using some Liquitex clear gesso. I like it a lot. I'd never tried it before. I bought some right before the holidays, and now I put that stuff on everything. I love it, love it, love it. And so it's just going to add like a little primer, a little layer, so that the paint doesn't actually get absorbed into the paper. It's going to sit on top of the gesso. And so I'm just going to take some colors that are they're going to kind of represent what I'm seeing out my window. So my desk sits right in front of my window, and it's out to my backyard. And then I can see like trees and stuff and a little bit of the pond, and then I can see the neighbors' houses. So I'm just going to kind of sit here, and kind of like I did with my watercolor swatch, I'm going to just pull colors that I see. I'm not going to focus on objects. I just want to focus on colors. So this yellow paint that I'm pouring, this is old. I believe it was my daughter's paint when she was in high school, which was a long time ago. And it's a chroma paint. I'm sure it's expensive, but it's just been sitting around and I haven't used it. So yeah, I don't know if it's going to be able to be used. When it came out, it was not mixed, so I spent some time mixing it and tried to get the pigment back into the medium that was inside the paint can or the little paint tube. Then I just have some craft paint here, and I'm really trying to use my supplies diligently, and I'm not going to buy any more supplies because I'm going to use everything that I have on hand. One of the things I did over the holiday that was just so therapeutic, and I know a lot of people do this, especially this time of year, was I went through and just cleaned and purged everything that I did not use anymore, or that I had used and I was like, okay, it does not bring me joy. I need to pass it on to someone else. And when I did that, I was able to give myself a lot of room to put the supplies that I do use and that I do love right where they need to be, easily accessible. And so I kind of shifted my whole art room, and I am in love with it. I now have divided my space I've always had my sewing space, and that's just a hot mess. My daughter came over last night, and she was like, oh my gosh, Mom, this is scary. The sewing part probably will never be cleaned up. It's just a gigantic mess. But the other part is I have one side of my room where I can do my art. It's in front of the window, so I have natural light. I can film my videos. I can do my daily journaling. And then the back half of the room is where it's what I call my production side. That's where I'm making journals and, cutting fabric and cutting large pieces of paper and stuff. And yeah, it's just really awesome to have those two different spaces. And then, like I said, of course, my sewing space, which is a hot mess. Did I ever tell you I have 3 sewing machines? I have 3 sewing machines, and they're out at all times, and in the center of 2 of them, I'll have to show you sometime, but in the center of 2 of them, there is, I swear to you, the biggest pile of fabric scraps I've ever seen. And it's all just piled like in the middle of the table. And then there's a sewing machine on one end and a sewing machine on the other end. And I just grab from the pile as I'm sewing. And so it's magical. I'm pretty sure there's like some animals or something that have nested down in the fabric, or make a little colony of aliens or something. But anyway, yeah, it's pretty awesome. So now that I've gotten these colors on, I'm going through and I'm adding just a little extra splash of color, because there is this really bright blue truck that is in the center of what I'm seeing out my window. And for that, I'm using my oil pastels. I love, love, love them. And I know I've told you before, they're just a cheap set, and I just can't quit them. I love them, love them, love them. So I'm using those. There's that Woody Stabilo. I love those things, probably because they're just so fun to hold. I used a black, what was that on the left-hand side? I think that might have been a black wax water-soluble crayon, I believe. Yeah, I think it was. It's a Neo color. And then I'm just kind of going and working through those little brown marks I put in. I originally put it in with, the Stabilo, which is water-soluble, but I didn't like that. So I went back and did a Neo color crayon that wasn't water-soluble, and I liked that a lot better. And so now I kind of want to put words on here, because again, this is a swatch book. This is for informational purposes. This is for inspiration. This is for me to go through and look at and say, oh, I love those colors, or oh, I remember that day when the sun was shining and this was what I saw out my window. It would be really cool to watch as my window scene changes throughout the year. I've already been thinking about what it's going to look like in the spring and what it's going to look like in the summer. And so it'd be cool to go back and check in this journal and see how it's changed. But anyway, I put the date on there. And then I just wrote where I was, which was out my window. Now, once I get off camera, I actually go back and I write a little bit about what was going on in this scene. And so at the very end of this video, you'll kind of see, yeah, here I go with the crayon, making that brown a little brighter. But anyway, so I go back and I add some more detail. And so there you go, my first swatch on the acrylic side of my Swatch journal. Guys, I hope you are doing wonderful. I hope you are healthy. I hope you're happy. I hope you do something creative today. And oh, by the way, watch for some new journals to be coming out soon. Have a great rest of the day, kiddos. Love ya. Bye.